After her mother died in a tragic accident, 9-year-old Ebony's world fell apart. Her father remarried a woman named Nafula, who smiled in front of others but had a heart full of greed. Nafula had only married Ebony's father for his money, and once he was often away for work, she showed her true face. At first, Ebony thought maybe Nafula would care for her, but that hope quickly faded. Nafula made her feel like she didn't belong. She took away Ebony's toys, locked up her books, and gave her old clothes to wear while her own daughter wore the best dresses. Every day, Ebony was treated like a servant, cooking, cleaning, and working all day while other children played or went to school. Nafula would whisper cruel things to her, saying she was useless, unwanted, and a burden. Ebony missed her mother terribly and cried herself to sleep most nights, holding on to the last memory of love she had. Her dreams of learning, writing, and becoming someone one day started to fade. She began to believe maybe she really didn't matter. But deep inside, a small spark still lived in her heart, a hope that one day, things might change. Though she was just a little girl, unwanted and unloved, something in her refused to fully break. Even as her stepmother tried to erase her future, Ebony quietly promised herself, "One day, I will be more than what she says I am." In the eyes of the village, Nafula looked like the perfect stepmother. She always smiled, spoke softly, and walked around with Ebony by her side, pretending to care for her like her own child. People would say, "What a kind woman. Ebony is lucky to have her." But behind the closed doors of their home, the truth was very different. The moment no one was watching, Nafula's smile would vanish, and her voice would turn cold. She made Ebony wake up before the sun, scrub the floors, wash the clothes, cook all the meals, and serve everyone at the table, even Kamaria, her daughter, who never lifted a finger. Kamaria had everything Ebony once dreamed of. She wore shiny shoes, went to school every day with a packed lunch, and had her own room full of books, dolls, and dresses. Ebony, on the other hand, slept on a mat in the corner of the kitchen. Her hands were always rough from cleaning. Her stomach often growled with hunger. And the worst part, Nafula didn't let her go to school. Every morning, Ebony would watch other children walk past their gate with backpacks and happy faces, while she stayed behind with a broom in her hand. She would ask, "Why can't I go too?" And Nafula would snap, "Your place is in this house. You're lucky I even feed you." Whenever guests came over, Nafula made sure Ebony smiled and said polite things, just to keep up the lie. And Ebony, scared of punishment, played along. She lived in fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of being thrown out. Fear of being forgotten. But deep inside, her heart screamed for someone to see the truth. She dreamed that maybe one day, someone would look past Nafula's fake smile and see her pain. She dreamed of going to school, writing poems, and reading stories like she used to with her mother. Nafula kept reminding her, "You are not my child. You are here to serve. You are nothing without us." But Ebony didn't give up completely. At night, when everyone was asleep, she would take scraps of old newspapers and write small poems with bits of charcoal. She would hide them under a loose brick near the backyard. It was her little secret, her only way of surviving. Her hands were tired, her back ached, but her words gave her strength. She wrote about freedom, about her mother's love, about flying far away. Even if no one read them, she believed one day they would matter. Every day was a battle. Nafula's love was just a mask for the world, but her cruelty was Ebony's daily reality. Yet somehow, through all the pain, Ebony held on to one tiny hope, that her story wasn't over. That beyond this pain, beyond this fake smile, something better was waiting. She didn't know when, or how, but she believed. And sometimes, belief is the only light a person needs in the darkest place. Ebony had always found peace in writing. Even when life was hard, even when she was tired from scrubbing floors or cooking meals all day, her heart felt a little lighter whenever she wrote her poems in secret. Late at night, with just a piece of charcoal and scraps of paper or old newspaper, she poured out her pain, her dreams, and her deepest wishes. Words became her world, a place where she could be free. One day, her schoolteacher from years ago, who hadn't forgotten her talent, secretly entered one of her poems into a regional poetry competition. Ebony didn't even know. Weeks later, something amazing happened. One morning, a letter arrived. It had a golden seal and Ebony's name on it. It was an invitation to a prestigious city school, a place for gifted children, a place where dreams came true. Her poem had won first prize. The judges were amazed by her words. The letter said the school wanted to give her a scholarship, a chance to study, to grow, to shine. For the first time in years, Ebony's eyes filled with happy tears. She held the letter close to her chest and ran to show Nafula, hoping, just maybe, she would be proud. But Nafula didn't smile. She didn't even read the letter. She snatched it from Ebony's hands and walked slowly to the fireplace. Ebony followed her, confused and scared. Then, without a word, Nafula held the letter over the flames. Ebony screamed, "No, please," but it was too late. The paper curled and turned to ash. Ebony fell to her knees, her heart breaking in silence. Nafula leaned in close, her voice like ice, and whispered, "You were born to serve my daughter, not shine brighter than her. Don't ever forget that." The pain in that moment was deeper than anything Ebony had ever felt. That letter was her light, her one way out, her proof that she mattered, and it was gone in seconds. She couldn't sleep that night. She just stared at the ashes. Her dreams felt like they were buried with that letter. For days, she barely spoke. She still cleaned, still cooked, still obeyed, but something in her had gone quiet. Her poems stopped. Her eyes lost their shine. It was like her soul had been locked away again. But even when her world felt cold and hopeless, something small inside her refused to die. A memory of her mother's voice, a line from her winning poem, the sound of her name being spoken with pride, they stayed with her. Nafula had stolen her chance, but she couldn't erase her words from the world. And one day, Ebony promised herself, even if no one helped her, even if the world stayed cruel, she would rise again. Maybe not today. Maybe not soon. But the fire in her would return. Because even though the letter was burned, the dream still lived inside her. And dreams, when held tightly enough, don't die, they wait for their time to shine. It was Ebony's 16th birthday, but there was no cake, no gifts, not even a kind word. Birthdays had never meant anything in Nafula's house. But that morning, something strange happened. Nafula called Ebony and said, "Get ready. We are going to visit your mother's grave." Ebony's heart skipped a beat. It had been years since she had seen her mother's resting place. She didn't even know if it was real. She quickly tied her old scarf, slipped on her worn-out sandals, and followed Nafula without asking any questions. They walked deep into the forest, far from the village, far from any houses or roads. The trees grew taller and thicker, the path darker. Ebony's feet began to hurt, but she kept walking, hoping she might finally feel close to her mother. After hours of walking, Nafula suddenly stopped. They were now in the middle of nowhere, no graves, no flowers, just silence and shadows. Ebony looked around, confused. "Where's the grave?" she asked softly. Nafula turned to her, eyes cold and full of something cruel. "There is no grave," she said. Then she pulled off the small bag Ebony had carried, her only belongings, and threw it far into the bushes. Ebony stared in shock. "What are you doing?" she cried. Nafula stepped closer, leaned in, and whispered, "You're no one. No one will miss you." Before Ebony could even speak, Nafula turned around and walked away. Within seconds, her figure disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the forest. Ebony ran after her, shouting her name, begging her to come back. But there was no answer. Just the sound of wind and the beginning of rain. The sky darkened. The trees shook. And Ebony stood alone, scared, wet, hungry, and heartbroken. She sat on the muddy ground and cried until her voice gave out. Rain poured down on her, soaking her clothes, chilling her skin. She had nothing. No food. No water. No shelter. No one. Night came fast, and the forest became full of strange noises. Rustling leaves, animal calls, and the sound of something moving in the dark. Ebony curled up near a tree, shaking, not just from the cold but from the fear that maybe Nafula was right. Maybe no one would miss her. Maybe she would die here, forgotten. But just before the sun came up the next morning, something inside her shifted. She looked up at the trees and whispered, "I'm still here." She didn't know how, but she was alive. Weak, lost, and cold, yes. But breathing. And if she was still breathing, she still had a chance. She pushed herself up slowly, using the tree for support. She didn't know where to go. She didn't know who would help her. But step by step, she started walking, because giving up wasn't her story. She had survived every storm so far, and somehow, even this one wouldn't break her completely. Somewhere, somehow, hope was waiting. Days passed. Ebony wandered through the forest, weak and broken. Her legs were shaking, her lips dry, her stomach empty. She had no idea where she was going. Every step felt like a mountain. She had no strength left, but she kept moving. Her eyes were tired, her body sore, but her heart was still beating. And that meant she wasn't done yet. On the third day, just as her body was ready to collapse, she reached the edge of a small village she had never seen before. There, sitting outside a tiny clay house, was an old woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Her name was Mama Jalea. Mama Jalea saw the pain in Ebony's eyes right away. She didn't ask many questions. She just opened her arms and said, "Come, child." Ebony fell into her arms and cried like a baby. It was the first time someone had held her with love in so many years. Mama Jalea took her inside, fed her warm soup, gave her dry clothes, and wrapped her in a blanket. She let Ebony rest, heal, and slowly remember what safety felt like. Mama Jalea had once been a schoolteacher and a writer herself. When she saw Ebony scribbling poems on a piece of old newspaper one evening, her eyes lit up. Instead of telling her to stop, Mama Jalea encouraged her. She gave Ebony notebooks, pens, and space to write. She told her, "Your pain has power, but your words can turn that pain into purpose." Those words stayed in Ebony's heart. She began writing more, poems, stories, essays. She poured everything out, her pain, her past, her dreams. But she didn't put her name on them. She sent them out into the world anonymously. Mama Jalea helped her post them to magazines, websites, and even social media pages. And something amazing began to happen. Her words started spreading. People everywhere were reading her essays, feeling her pain, and being moved by her strength. Her pieces were shared thousands of times. Some people cried. Some were inspired. No one knew the girl behind the words, but everyone felt her fire. She became a quiet voice of hope across the nation, a voice that said, "Even in darkness, you can rise." Ebony had nothing when she started, no name, no home, no money. But she had her words. And her words changed everything. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not as a servant, not as a burden, but as a storyteller, a survivor. Mama Jalea watched her grow with pride, saying, "You were not left to die in the storm, my child. You were planted. And now, you bloom." Ebony still carried her past, but now it gave her strength. Her pain didn't break her, it built her. She had walked through fire and come out shining. And though the world didn't know her face yet, they knew her voice. And her voice was just getting started. By the time Ebony turned 24, the girl who was once left to die in the forest had become a name everyone knew. The world still didn't know every detail of her past, but her words had reached millions. Her essays and poems had turned into books, and those books became bestsellers. People stood in long lines just to buy her work, just to read the voice that once cried in the dark. But Ebony didn't stop there. She saved every coin she earned. She worked day and night, building something bigger than just fame. She wanted to create a place where other girls like her, broken, forgotten, and hurt, could find healing, just like she did. So she moved to Mombasa City and opened her own publishing house. She called it Ink Rising. She didn't just publish her own books, she gave chances to new writers, especially young women with stories to tell. Her office was simple but full of life. Walls covered in words, shelves full of stories, and a team of women who believed in dreams. Ebony wasn't just a writer anymore. She was a leader, a builder, a fighter for those who had no voice. And that wasn't all. She used her money to start a foundation for orphaned and abandoned girls. She built shelters, schools, and safe spaces. She gave them books, food, love, and most of all, hope. The media started calling her the Queen of Ink. Her story was everywhere, on TV, in magazines, and all over the internet. People wanted to know how a girl who once had nothing became a woman who gave everything. But Ebony never let the fame change her. She still visited Mama Jalea every month. She still wrote with the same fire in her heart. She still remembered the nights she cried alone, the letter that burned, the cold rain, and the whisper that said she was nothing. And that's why she worked even harder, not to prove them wrong, but to show the world what happens when you choose to rise, even when you're broken. Girls from villages and cities began writing to her, saying, "You gave me courage." Some called her a hero. Some called her a miracle. But Ebony just smiled and said, "I'm a survivor with a pen." She wore no crown of gold, but her crown was built from pain, healing, and purpose. She had created her own kingdom, not with power or wealth, but with stories and love. She lifted others as she rose. She didn't forget where she came from. In fact, she made sure no girl would ever feel as lost and alone as she once did. Ebony had no fairy godmother, no magic, no rescue, only grit, grace, and a fire that refused to die. And that fire lit up the world. Years had passed, and Ebony's name was everywhere. Her books had touched hearts, her foundation had changed lives, and her publishing house was growing fast. Many people came to her office every day, writers, dreamers, job seekers. One morning, her assistant brought in a job application. Ebony looked at the name and paused. It said, Nafula. Her heart stopped for a second, but her face stayed calm. She nodded and said, "Let her in." The door opened, and there she was, older now, tired, and clearly struggling. Nafula didn't recognize the woman sitting behind the large gold-embossed desk, surrounded by shelves filled with best-selling books. She began to speak, trying to sound confident, but the moment her eyes met Ebony's, she froze. Her face went pale. She dropped her bag. Then, shaking, she fell to her knees. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Ebony." But Ebony didn't move. She stood tall, dressed in elegance, calm and powerful. The same girl once called a burden now looked like royalty. The room went silent. Ebony finally spoke, her voice strong but full of truth. "You taught me to survive. But I taught myself how to reign." Nafula lowered her head, too ashamed to speak. Ebony didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her success was her answer. Her healing was her revenge. And in that moment, it was clear, Ebony had won, not with hate, but with strength, grace, and a crown she built all on her own.